So I'm going to be informing you guys about two skills, Backwave and Tempest, in the single-handed katana skill tree of Nioh. A lot of people don't seem to understand how it works and think it's a waste of skill points. We're not just going to be talking about how to make it work, but also more specifics about it and if it's a good choice. So we're going to look at what information is actually provided to us by Nioh itself. For Tempest, it says it's a mid to low stance skill, so it works in anything but high stance. Breaks the opponent's guard, then uses your guard to knock them down. Now, that doesn't really mean anything to us, because it's one of the few skills that doesn't actually tell us what button we need to press to actually do that. So that's where some of the confusion is coming from. Backwave, mid-stance skill, guards just before an incoming hit to knock the attacker off balance. So it's a time-based thing, but a lot of people will find that they will guard right before a hit and nothing will happen. So that's where some confusion is coming in too. And then Backwave 2, obviously we can't use it if we don't know how Tempest works, and we don't know how Backwave works. And in total, to get all of these skills, you're going to have to invest 8 skill points, samurai skill points. And that's a pretty hefty amount considering the fact that haze, a different counterattack move, only costs 5. And I believe that water shadow, the 1 point, 2 points, 2 point, yeah, that's going to cost 5 points as well. So it's going to cost 3 more points than the other counterattack moves to get all of them to work. So in order to do a Tempest, you need to just not be in high guard, and you have to hit the enemy while they are blocking, and you need to do enough stamina damage to them while they're blocking in order to break their guard, and then you just press L1 to proceed with the move. And there is a specific timing on L1. If you do it the moment that you break the stamina, it will not work, and if you do it too late, it will not work. In order to do it properly, you just need to hit L1 right about here, just a moment after you break their stamina. So now that we have that down, Backwave is a little bit more complicated. The reason why your guarding isn't working and not sending the enemy flying is because in order for a Backwave to work, you cannot be moving whatsoever. If your analog stick has any input put into it, whatever, Backwave will not work. In order for it to work, you have to stop moving and then guard right before the attack hits you, and that's when a Backwave will work. And also you have to be in mid-guard. So lastly, in order to use Backwave 2, which is the counterattack after a successful Backwave, you just have to press L1 right after doing a Backwave. It has more or less the same timing as pressing L1 just after breaking the opponent's guard using Tempest. So if you have that timing down, you'll have this down real quick. I'm more interested in discussing Tempest because it seems to want to be used as a counterattack move, just like Water Shadow and Haze, but it has some properties that make it not up to par with the other counterattackers. So let's talk about using Backwave just as a defensive tactic, just using it if you were just blocking it, right? So you will, of course, not take any damage, and the enemy will almost always be depleted of almost all of their stamina, if not all of it. And you will still use up some stamina to do the attack, but you will always only use 25 stamina to do a Backwave, always 25, rather than the variable amount that you might have to use to block the attack. So I'm mainly just going to compare Backwave to the Haze counterattack because I've found through a bunch of different tests that Haze does more damage than Water Shadow, so I tend to use that one more. So usually with Haze you would do the defensive maneuver, and then it will usually deplete the enemy of stamina, and then you'll go in for a grapple. So that's what I'm using for my test. And then for Backwave, what I will do is I will do the Backwave and then do the counter attack off of it, and then do a final blow, and we'll do compare the damage. So now, using the typical combo of using haze and then a grapple, you will get about 12% more damage than you will doing Backwave. Now, the Backwave follow-up will of course do more damage. In the initial attack, you will lose out when you will lose out in the follow-up in almost every situation. I've done a bunch of combo follow-ups after doing a Backwave, and then did the same thing using haze, and I found that it did less damage. So why would you use Backwave over haze in any kind of counterattack scenario? There really isn't much of a reason to. The only real reason why you would use it is if you do not think that the enemy is going to run out of stamina when you do a haze, because then you won't get the grapple and you will end up doing less damage. That is where Backwave will do more damage in almost every case, is if the enemy does not run out of stamina, because you're still guaranteed the final blow after doing a Backwave. Whereas with haze, you're not always guaranteed that. You're not always guaranteed... sorry, I misspoke. With haze, you're always guaranteed a final blow because the enemy will fall on the ground. But you will not always be guaranteed the grapple because they won't always run out of stamina. Most times they will, but sometimes they won't. So is there any real reason to use Backwave over haze? Yeah, there kind of is. Oh, excuse me. Backwave, of course, doesn't take up a ability slot, a skill slot like haze does. Haze takes L1 and square, which is the same as some other attacks, such as the one where you hit them with the sheath of the blade and then do a follow-up attack. You will be able to keep that if you use Backwave as well. Also, you don't really have to think about it too much. Sometimes a Backwave can happen by accident as long as you train yourself to stop moving right before attacking. Of course, the timing for the follow-up attack is pretty tight, but even if you don't get it, you will get a lot of stamina damage. But it's not too hard to just train yourself to react, especially since haze has a much more generous timing for counterattacking than Backwave does. It has it's a much easier ability to use than Backwave, I've found. I've also tested out haze and Backwave in multi-group fighting, and they both are almost entirely the same. When you do a Backwave, you will be invincible when you first deflect the attack, just like with haze. You can do it to enemies that you aren't locked onto, just like with haze. And the counterattack also makes you invincible, just like with haze. The only difference is that when you do a Backwave, you will do the counterattack towards whoever you're currently locked onto. And you can actually end up doing the counterattack towards a different enemy than who you actually did the deflect against, which I guess could be helpful in maybe one scenario at some point, maybe. But you're also vulnerable when going in for the counterattack where you are not in haze. So it seems that for every big downside that Backwave has compared to haze, there is some kind of really unique and niche kind of benefit that it has, which ultimately makes it not really worth the extra samurai skill points that you're going to have to put down just to get the most out of it. But there is one big downside that Backwave has against haze, and it's a pretty huge one. And that problem is that Backwave will solely only work against human and revenants. It will not work against any kind of skeleton warriors or yokai of any kind, as far as I've found. You know these little skeletal soldiers here that I'm showing right now. They are vulnerable to haze, but they are not at all vulnerable to not only Backwave 2, but they are also completely immune to being hit by Backwave, which is what I found the most surprising. I didn't actually test if they're vulnerable to Tempest, but I didn't really care that much about that. I was at least expecting Backwave to work against almost all type of enemies, and that's what would make it unique, but it will only work against humans and revenants. That's all it works against. So, I mean, ultimately the choice is yours. It is going to be more expensive to get what I would generally consider an inferior version of a counterattack. I would just stick with Haze and just put any other guard and square attack on just a different stance. I think that Backwave, if they were going to make it better, they would have to make it work against almost all enemies, and also let it happen on every stance, not just mid stance, and also make it work while you're moving. I think that would make Backwave a much more viable option and worth all of the skill points you put down for it. It's just the tight timing and not being able to move makes you really have to go out of your way to get a Backwave, where Haze just feels very natural. So really the choice is yours, but I'm gonna stick with Haze just for now. I guess one nice benefit of Backwave is that it's just fun to throw someone into the ground and end up killing them by it. I think it personally looks more stylish than Haze does. But yeah, that's it for the video. Hopefully you found it informative. Peace.